The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty trading post, and Clara Thompson pressed her hand against the rough wooden door to steady herself, her heart hammering with a mixture of exhaustion and dread as she peered through the smudged window at what would become her new home in this God-forsaken corner of Colorado territory in the spring of 1872. She had traveled 3 weeks from Philadelphia, each mile taking her further from civilization and deeper into a world she barely understood. The advertisement had been clear enough. Respectable woman needed for household duties, room and board provided, wages negotiable. What it had not mentioned was the isolation, the endless brown landscape dotted with sage and the occasional twisted juniper, or the way the wind seemed to howl through every crack in the world out here. Clara gathered her worn carpetbag and stepped down from the coach, her boots raising small clouds of dust that coated her already travel-stained skirts. She was 22 years old, dark-haired and plain-faced by Philadelphia standards, with gray eyes that had seen too much hardship in too few years. Her mother had died 2 winters past, leaving Clara alone in a city that had no use for unmarried women without means or family connections. The advertisement had seemed like Providence, even if it meant traveling to the edge of the known world. "You the woman for the Nelson place?" the stagecoach driver asked, already unloading her trunk. "I am," Clara said, lifting her chin despite the tremor in her voice. The driver jerked his head toward the trading post. "Someone'll be along for you. They knew you were coming today." Before Clara could respond, the driver had climbed back onto his perch, and the stagecoach was rolling away, leaving her standing alone on the dirt road that served as Colorado City's Main Street. The settlement was hardly worthy of the name city. A dozen rough-hewn buildings lined the street, most looking as though a strong wind might knock them over. Beyond the town, the land stretched flat and endless until it met the purple shadows of mountains in the far distance. Clara had just picked up her carpetbag when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. She turned to see a rider approaching, sitting tall in the saddle on a magnificent bay horse. Even from a distance, she could see he was a large man, broad-shouldered and wearing the practical clothes of someone who worked the land. Dusty trousers, a worn shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. The rider drew up beside her and dismounted in one fluid motion. When he removed his hat, Clara found herself looking up at a man perhaps 5 or 6 years her senior, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of Clear Creek water. His dark blonde hair was longer than fashion dictated, and his face bore the weathered look of someone who spent his days under the relentless western sun. He was handsome in a way that made Clara's breath catch, though she immediately chided herself for such foolish thoughts. "She was here to work, nothing more, Miss Thompson." His voice was deep and surprisingly gentle. "Yes, sir. Samuel Nelson, I appreciate you making the journey. I know it could not have been easy." He picked up her trunk as though it weighed nothing and secured it to the back of his horse. "The ranch is about an hour's ride from here. I brought a horse for you if you can ride." Clara hesitated. "I have ridden, sir, though not for some years." "Samuel," he corrected, "and we will take it slow." He gestured to a second horse, a gentle-looking mare that had been tied to the post outside the trading post. "This is Daisy. She has the temperament of a lamb." Something in his tone made Clara relax slightly. She had expected a gruff, demanding employer, someone who would see her as little more than a servant. But there was kindness in Samuel Nelson's eyes, a quiet patience that eased some of her anxiety. The ride to the ranch tested every muscle Clara had forgotten she possessed. Samuel kept his word and set an easy pace, but it had been years since she had sat a horse, and by the time the buildings came into view, She was gripping the saddle horn with white knuckles. The Nelson ranch was larger than she had expected. The main house was a solid structure of rough-cut logs with a covered porch that faced east. Nearby stood a substantial barn, a corral with several horses, and various outbuildings. It was not grand by any measure, but it spoke of hard work and careful planning. Someone had planted cottonwood saplings near the house, and though they were still young and spindly, Clara could imagine how they would someday provide shade. Samuel helped her dismount, his hand steady on her waist. Clara felt her face flush at the contact, proper though it was, and she quickly stepped away. "You must be exhausted," Samuel said. "Let me show you the house." The interior was Spartan but clean, with whitewashed walls and simple furniture that looked handmade. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. 2 doors led to what Clara assumed were bedrooms. "That room is yours," Samuel said, indicating the door on the right. "I hope you will find it comfortable." Clara set down her carpet bag and looked at her employer, trying to understand the situation. "Mr. Nelson, Samuel, forgive my directness, but I was under the impression this was a large household. The advertisement mentioned duties." Samuel removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that suggested discomfort. "That was my sister's doing. Emma thought the advertisement should sound more official. The truth is, Miss Thompson, it is just me here. My parents passed 5 years ago within months of each other. Emma married last year and moved to Denver with her husband. I have been managing on my own since then, but I am not much of a cook, and the place has gotten away from me. I need help, that is true enough, but I also thought it might be good to have another person here." The isolation can be difficult. Clara felt her throat tighten. "Sir, I cannot stay here alone with you. It would not be proper." "I understand your concern," Samuel said quickly. "Emma thought of that. She insisted I arrange for you to have your own space, and she made me promise that her friend, Mrs. Margaret Walsh, would come by regularly. Margaret lives about 5 miles east with her husband and their children. She has already agreed to visit 3 times a week, and you would be welcome at their home anytime. Emma also plans to visit as often as she can, though Denver is a long journey." It was irregular, certainly, but Clara had few options. She could not afford the stagecoach fare back to Philadelphia, and even if she could, there was nothing waiting for her there. She looked at Samuel Nelson's earnest face and made her decision. "Very well, but I insist that everything remain entirely proper." Relief flooded Samuel's features. "Of course, I give you my word as a gentleman." Over the next week, Clara settled into a routine. She woke before dawn to prepare breakfast, cleaned the house, tended the vegetable garden that had been neglected for too long, and prepared the evening meal. Samuel was gone most of the day, working with the small herd of cattle he was building or repairing the endless things that seemed to break on a ranch. When he was present, he was unfailingly polite, almost formal, as though determined to prove his respectability. But it was in the small moments that Clara began to see beyond the courteous employer. Samuel always thanked her for meals, even simple ones. He brought her fresh eggs from the henhouse without being asked. When he noticed she was struggling to reach a high shelf, he spent an evening building her a step stool, sanding it smooth so there would be no splinters. These gestures of consideration touched something in Clara that had been frozen since her mother's death. Margaret Walsh proved to be a godsend. She was a plump, cheerful woman of perhaps 40, with 6 children ranging from teenagers to a toddler. She descended on the ranch like a benevolent whirlwind, bringing fresh bread, gossip from the surrounding homesteads, and a stamp of respectability that eased Clara's remaining concerns. "Samuel Nelson is one of the good ones," Margaret declared during her first visit, settling herself at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. His father was a hard man, demanding, never satisfied. Samuel is different. He treats his animals well, helps his neighbors, and he has never once failed to pay what he owes. You could do worse, my dear, much worse. I am merely his housekeeper, Clara protested, but Margaret gave her a knowing smile. For now, perhaps, but I have eyes in my head, girl. The way that man looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. There is more than household management on his mind. Clara's protests were cut short by the arrival of Margaret's children, who had discovered a nest of kittens in the barn and required immediate adult supervision. But Margaret's words stayed with her, and she found herself watching Samuel more carefully. She began to notice things she had missed before. The way his face softened when he came in from a long day and found her at the stove, the house warm and supper nearly ready. How he always positioned himself between her and any potential danger, whether it was a spooked horse or a rattlesnake sunning itself near the garden. The careful distance he maintained, never standing too close, never touching her except when necessary, as though he was afraid of frightening her away. One evening, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Clara was washing dishes when she heard raised voices outside. She dried her hands and moved to the window, her heart racing. 2 men on horseback were in the yard, and even from a distance, she could see they were trouble. They had the lean, predatory look of men who lived on the wrong side of the law. Samuel stood between them and the house, his stance relaxed, but his hand resting casually near the revolver at his hip. Clara could not hear what was being said, but she saw one of the strangers gesture aggressively. Samuel said something brief, his voice too low to carry. The 2 men exchanged glances, then wheeled their horses and rode away at a gallop. Samuel stood watching until they disappeared from sight, then turned and walked back to the house. When he entered, Clara was standing by the table, her hands clenched in her apron. "Who were they?" she asked. Samuel hung his hat on the peg by the door. "Drifters. They wanted to water their horses and help themselves to supplies. I told them they could have water but nothing else. They looked dangerous. Some men out here are," Samuel acknowledged. "But most trouble passes by if you do not give it a reason to stop." He must have seen the fear in her eyes because his expression gentlened. "Clara, I would never let anyone harm you. I promise you that." It was the first time he had used her given name, and something shifted between them with that simple familiarity. Clara realized with a start that she trusted this man, trusted him in a way she had not trusted anyone since her father died when she was a child. "I know," she said softly. Summer settled over the high plains of Colorado Territory, bringing long days of intense heat and brilliant sun. Clara developed a routine of working in the early morning and late evening, retreating to the relative cool of the house during the worst of the afternoon heat. Samuel adjusted his schedule to match, working from before dawn until midday, then using the afternoon to handle tasks closer to the house. This meant they spent more time together, and Clara found herself looking forward to these hours. Samuel had a quiet intelligence that surprised her. He had been educated by his mother, who had been a schoolteacher before her marriage, and he had a small collection of books that he treasured. In the evenings, after supper, they fell into the habit of sitting on the porch while the day cooled, and sometimes Samuel would read aloud while Clara mended clothes or snapped beans for the next day's meals. One particularly hot afternoon, Clara was in the kitchen preparing bread dough when Samuel came in from the barn, his shirt soaked with sweat. "I am sorry to bother you," he said, "but I need to ride out to check the water source in the north pasture." One of the hands from the Murphy place stopped by and said their creek is running low. "I am concerned ours might be affected too. I will likely be gone until evening." "Of course," Clara said. "Be careful." Samuel hesitated at the door. "Clara, there is something I have been meaning to discuss with you. When I return, if you are not too tired, I would appreciate a few moments of your time." The serious tone in his voice made Clara's stomach flutter with nervousness. "Certainly." She spent the afternoon in a state of anxiety, unable to settle to any task. Had she done something wrong? Was he unhappy with her work? Perhaps he had decided the arrangement was too irregular after all and was planning to send her away. The thought filled her with unexpected despair. Somewhere in the past weeks, this rough ranch house had become home, and Samuel Nelson had become far more than an employer. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple when Samuel finally returned. Clara had kept his supper warm, and she served it while he washed up. They ate in unusual silence, the tension thick enough to taste. Finally, Samuel pushed his empty plate away and looked at her directly. "Clara, I am not a man who is comfortable with fancy words, so I am just going to speak plainly. These past weeks, having you here, they have been the best I can remember in a long time. Not just because the house is clean or the meals are good, though those things matter. It is more than that. It is the sound of another person's voice, the knowledge that I am not alone anymore. It is seeing you in the garden in the morning, hearing you sing sometimes when you think I am not around. It is having someone to share the day with, to talk to about small things and big ones." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he must hear it. Samuel continued, his weathered hands gripping the edge of the table. "I know you came here as my housekeeper. I know that was the agreement, but I find myself hoping for more. Clara, I am asking if you would consider staying here permanently as my wife." The world seemed to tilt. Clara stared at him, unable to form words. "I know this is sudden," Samuel said quickly. "And I know I am not much of a catch. This is a hard life, isolated and demanding, but I would do everything in my power to make you happy. You would not be my servant, you would be my partner, my equal in all things. I would value your opinions, respect your wishes. This ranch, everything I have, would be as much yours as mine." "Samuel," Clara finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. He stood abruptly, misreading her tone. "Forgive me. I have overstepped. I should not have presumed. You have every right to refuse, and I will not hold it against you. You can stay on as housekeeper if you wish, with no awkwardness between us, or I will pay your passage back to Philadelphia, whatever you prefer." "Samuel, stop," Clara said, standing as well. "You have not let me answer." He froze, hope and fear warring in his eyes. Clara took a deep breath, her mind racing. She thought of Philadelphia, of the cold tenement where she had lived after her mother died, of the endless series of menial jobs that barely kept her fed. She thought of the loneliness, the knowledge that she had no place in that world, no future beyond growing old and desperate. Then she thought of this place, of mornings watching the sun rise over the endless plains, of the satisfaction of a garden growing under her care, of evenings on the porch while Samuel read to her in his deep, steady voice. She thought of how safe she felt here, how valued. She thought of Samuel himself, his quiet strength, his gentle consideration, the way her heart lifted when she heard his footsteps on the porch. "I came here expecting to be a servant," Clara said slowly. "I expected to spend my life taking orders, grateful for a roof over my head and food to eat. That was the best I thought I could hope for." Samuel's face fell, and he nodded as though accepting a verdict. "But you are offering me something I never dared to dream of," Clara continued, her voice growing stronger. "Partnership, equality, a home that would truly be mine. Samuel, I would be honored to be your wife." For a moment, Samuel simply stared at her as though unable to believe what he had heard. Then joy broke across his face like sunrise, transforming him. "Truly, you mean it." "I do." He crossed the space between them in 2 long strides and took her hands in his. His palms were calloused from work, warm and solid. "Clara, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you. I swear it." "You already are," she said, and meant it with her whole heart. Samuel lifted one of her hands to his lips and kissed it gently, a gesture so tender that Clara felt tears prick her eyes. They stood there in the lamplight, the vast silence of the prairie surrounding them, and Clara thought she had never felt more certain of anything in her life. They were married a week later by the traveling minister who rode a circuit through the scattered settlements of eastern Colorado Territory. Margaret Walsh served as witness and insisted on hosting a celebration dinner at her home, inviting every family within a day's ride. Samuel's sister Emma could not make the journey from Denver on such short notice, but she sent a letter expressing her delight and promising to visit as soon as possible. The wedding itself was simple. Clara wore her best dress, a dove gray cotton that Margaret had helped her alter to better fit. Samuel wore a new shirt Emma had sent months ago that he had been saving for a special occasion. When the minister asked if they took each other as husband and wife, Clara's "I do" rang out clear and certain, echoed by Samuel's deeper voice. That night, back at the ranch that was now truly their home, Samuel carried Clara over the threshold despite her laughing protests. He set her down gently in the main room, suddenly awkward. "Clara, I want you to know there is no rush for anything. We can take whatever time you need to feel comfortable." She looked up at this good man who had offered her not just his name but his respect, who saw her not as property or servant but as an equal partner. Reaching up, she touched his face, feeling the rough stubble under her fingers. "Samuel, I am your wife. I want to be your wife in every way." He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding and drew her close. His kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, but when Clara responded, wrapping her arms around his neck, the kiss deepened. When he lifted her and carried her to the bedroom, Clara went willingly, her heart full of trust and the first stirrings of love. The following months taught Clara the truth of Samuel's promise. He treated her as a partner in every decision. When they discussed whether to expand the herd or focus on improving the existing stock, he listened carefully to her opinions. When she suggested planting fruit trees despite the challenging climate, he helped her research which varieties might survive and ordered saplings from a nursery in Kansas City. The money from the ranch went into a shared account, and Samuel insisted she understand all the finances. "This is your home as much as mine," he said one evening as they went over the books together. "You should know exactly where we stand, what we own, what we owe. Partners share everything, good and bad." Clara found herself falling in love with her husband more deeply with each passing day. She loved his work ethic, the way he rose before dawn and labored until he could barely stand, all to build a better future for them. She loved his kindness, the way he cared for his animals and his land. She loved his patience, especially when she made mistakes or did not understand something about ranch work. He never made her feel foolish, always took time to explain. And Samuel, for his part, seemed to blossom under her care. He smiled more readily, laughed at her jokes, shared his thoughts and dreams in a way Margaret said he never had before. At night, in the privacy of their bedroom, they learned each other's bodies, their lovemaking growing from tentative exploration to passionate certainty. As autumn painted the cottonwoods gold, Samuel had to make a cattle drive to Denver. It would take nearly 3 weeks, and he was clearly torn about leaving Clara alone. "Margaret has promised to visit every day," he said for the 10th time as he prepared to leave. And old Tom Harris from the next ranch over said he would ride by every evening to make sure everything is secure. You have the rifle, and you know how to use it. If anything seems wrong, anything at all, you ride straight to the Walsh place and wait for me there." "Samuel, I will be fine," Clara assured him, though she dreaded the coming separation. "We need the money from this sale, and you are the only one who can negotiate the best price." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I am going to miss you every moment. And I you. But you will be home before we know it." The first week alone was difficult. The house felt too empty, too quiet. Clara threw herself into work, harvesting the last of the garden, preserving everything she could for the winter, cleaning and organizing until there was nothing left to clean or organize. Margaret's daily visits helped, and Clara was grateful for the older woman's practical company. On the 8th day, Clara woke feeling queasy. She made it outside just in time to be sick behind the house. When Margaret arrived later that morning and found Clara looking pale and exhausted, the older woman took one look at her and smiled. "How long since your last courses?" Margaret asked gently. Clara froze, counting back in her mind. 6 weeks, nearly 7. "Oh," she breathed, her hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach. "Oh my. A baby," Margaret said with satisfaction. "Well, that will be wonderful news for Samuel when he returns." Clara spent the rest of Samuel's absence in a haze of wonder and terror. A baby. She was going to have a baby. She and Samuel were going to be parents. The thought filled her with joy and fear in equal measure. Would she be a good mother? What if something went wrong? The nearest doctor was in Colorado City, hours away. Women died in childbirth out here, she knew that, had seen the small markers in the cemetery. But beneath the fear was a deep happiness. She and Samuel had created a life together. They would have a family. When Samuel finally returned, dusty and exhausted but grinning with the success of a good sale, Clara met him in the yard. He swept her into his arms, lifting her off the ground. "I missed you so much," he said against her hair. "Every day felt like a week. I have so much to tell you. The prices were better than I hoped, and I met a man who is interested in buying breeding stock come spring. Clara, we are going to make this work. I know we are." "Samuel," Clara said, pulling back to look at him. "I have news too." Something in her tone made him set her down carefully, his hands moving to her shoulders. "What is it? Are you all right? Did something happen while I was gone?" "I am fine. Better than fine. Samuel, I am with child." She watched the words register, saw his eyes widen with shock, then fill with tears. "A baby. We are having a baby." "Yes." He let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses and spun her around more carefully this time. "A baby, Clara, this is the most wonderful news. Are you feeling well? Have you been taking care of yourself? We should send for the doctor. Does Margaret know? What do we need to do?" Clara laughed at his torrent of questions, her own fears easing in the face of his obvious delight. "Margaret knows. She has been advising me. The doctor cannot do much this early, but we will send for him when the time comes. And Samuel, I am fine. I promise." That night, lying in bed with Samuel's hand resting protectively on her belly, Clara reflected on how completely her life had transformed. 6 months ago, she had been alone and desperate in Philadelphia, with no future beyond survival. Now she was a wife, soon to be a mother, a partner in a growing ranch, and most importantly, she was loved. Samuel had not just offered her a position or security. He had offered her an equal place at his side, and that had made all the difference. Winter came to the high plains with brutal force. Samuel had warned Clara that winters in Colorado territory were harsh, but she was unprepared for the reality. The wind cut like knives and snow piled in drifts that reached the windows. Samuel had spent the autumn preparing, building up firewood, securing the barn and outbuildings, bringing the cattle in closer where he could check on them daily. Still, the work was relentless. Clara's pregnancy progressed through the cold months. Margaret visited less frequently because of the weather, but she sent her oldest daughter, Ruth, to stay at the ranch for several weeks to help with the heavier work. Ruth was 16, capable and cheerful, and she and Clara became friends quickly. Samuel was endlessly solicitous. He insisted Clara rest more, took over tasks he thought too strenuous, and fretted over her constantly. It would have been irritating if it had not been so clearly motivated by love. When Clara snapped at him one evening after he had tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of laundry, he looked so crestfallen that she immediately apologized. "I am sorry," she said, taking his hand. "I know you are trying to help, but Samuel, I am not fragile. I need to keep working to feel useful. The baby is not due for months yet." "I just worry," he admitted. "Childbirth is dangerous, especially out here. The thought of losing you terrifies me, Clara. I do not know what I would do without you." Her irritation melted away. "You will not lose me. I am strong, and Margaret will be here, and we will send for the doctor when the time comes. Everything will be fine." He pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Outside, the wind howled across the frozen prairie, but inside they were warm and safe together. Emma finally made the journey from Denver in early spring, arriving with her husband, Charles Brighton, a pleasant-faced man who worked as a clerk for a freight company. Emma was a whirlwind of energy, exclaiming over Clara's swelling belly, examining the house and pronouncing it vastly improved under Clara's care, and regaling them with stories of life in Denver. "The city is growing so fast," Emma said over dinner that first night. "New people arriving every day, new buildings going up. Charles thinks we should invest in property, get in before prices rise too high." She turned to Clara with a warm smile. "I am so happy Samuel found you. He was too much alone before, and he never would have gone to the city to find a wife. You are exactly what he needed." "She is far more than I deserve," Samuel said quietly, reaching for Clara's hand. "Nonsense," Emma said briskly. "You deserve every happiness, Samuel. You have worked yourself nearly to death building this place. It is time you had some joy from it." The visit lasted a week, and by the time Emma and Charles left, Clara felt she had gained not just a sister-in-law but a true friend. Emma made her promise to write regularly, and insisted they would return in the summer to meet the baby. As Clara's due date approached, Margaret moved into the ranch, bringing her youngest daughter to help. The doctor from Colorado City had agreed to come when labor started, but everyone knew that babies came on their own schedule and the doctor might not arrive in time. Margaret had delivered dozens of babies, including several of her own with no assistance, and her calm competence eased Clara's growing anxiety. On a warm June evening, with the sun just setting and the smell of prairie grass heavy on the wind, Clara's labor began. Samuel had been working on repairs to the corral fence when Margaret sent Ruth running to fetch him. He burst into the house, his face white with fear. "Clara, is it time?" "Yes," Clara said, trying to smile despite the contraction that was gripping her. "Samuel, do not look so frightened. This is natural." "I will ride for the doctor," he said, already turning. "No time," Margaret said firmly. "The baby is coming fast. You can ride to the Harris place and ask Tom to fetch the doctor, but Samuel, you might want to stay. First babies do not always come quick, but I think this one will." Samuel looked torn, and Clara made the decision for him. "Stay, please, I want you here." He stayed, and Margaret, practical as always, put him to work. He hauled water, kept the fire going, and when Clara's labor intensified and she cried out, he held her hand, murmuring encouragement even as tears streamed down his own face. The doctor did not arrive, but he was not needed. Margaret's experienced hands guided their son into the world just after midnight. Samuel cut the cord with shaking hands, then stood frozen, staring at the tiny, red-faced creature Margaret wrapped in a clean blanket. "A boy," Margaret said with satisfaction, placing the baby in Clara's arms. "A fine, healthy boy." Clara looked down at her son, at his tiny, perfect fingers and his unfocused dark eyes, and felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. Samuel knelt beside the bed, touching the baby's cheek with one careful finger. "He is beautiful," Samuel whispered. "Clara, you did so well. You were so brave." "We made him together," Clara said softly. "Samuel, what should we name him?" They had discussed names but never quite settled on one. Samuel looked at his son, his expression full of wonder. "I always liked the name James after my grandfather." "But Clara, you should choose. Whatever name you want." "James Nelson," Clara said, trying it out. "Yes, I like that. James Samuel Nelson." "James," Samuel repeated, taking the baby's tiny hand in his much larger one. "Welcome to the world, son." The years that followed were marked by hard work, gradual prosperity, and deep happiness. The ranch grew as Samuel had hoped, the herd expanding, the land improved. They hired help, first seasonally, then permanently as the operation grew too large for Samuel to manage alone. Clara proved to have a good head for business, taking over the bookkeeping and later negotiating supply contracts that saved them considerable money. James was followed by a daughter, Grace, 2 years later, and then another son, William, 3 years after that. The house expanded, with Samuel building additional rooms and a proper second story. The young cottonwoods grew tall, providing the shade Clara had imagined, and the fruit trees, against all odds, not only survived but thrived, producing apples and pears that Margaret pronounced the finest in the county. Clara transformed the ranch house into a true home. She had real furniture shipped from Denver, hung curtains she sewed herself, and filled the rooms with the laughter and chaos of children. But she never forgot her place as Samuel's partner. Even with 3 children demanding her attention, she continued to be involved in every major decision about the ranch. Samuel continued to value her opinion, to discuss problems and plans with her, to treat her as the equal he had promised she would be. They weathered difficulties together. A drought one summer that left them wondering if they would have to sell part of the herd. A winter so brutal that they lost a dozen head of cattle despite all their efforts. Samuel's injury when a horse threw him, leaving him with a leg that ached in cold weather. Clara's bout with pneumonia that had Samuel Gray faced with terror until she finally turned the corner toward recovery. But they also celebrated triumphs. The year, Samuel's breeding stock won recognition at the territorial fair, bringing buyers from as far as Kansas. The day they paid off the last of the debt on the ranch and owned it clear. James's first successful ride handling cattle. Grace's gift for music, revealed when she was barely 5 years old. William's fascination with books and learning, so like his father. On their 10th anniversary, Samuel took Clara to Denver for a week, leaving the children in Margaret's capable care. It was the first time they had been alone together for more than a day since James was born. They stayed in a fine hotel, attended the theater, ate in restaurants, and walked through the bustling streets of the growing city. On their last evening, they sat in the hotel restaurant overlooking the street, and Samuel raised his glass. "To you, Clara. These 10 years have been the best of my life. You came expecting to be a servant, and instead you became my partner, my best friend, my love. I thank God for you every day." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Samuel, you gave me a life I never dreamed I could have. You saw me as a person worthy of respect when I had stopped seeing myself that way. You offered me equality when the world had only offered me servitude. I love you more than I can ever express." "You express it every day," Samuel said softly. "In 1,000 small ways. I see it, Clara. I feel it." They clinked their glasses together, and Clara thought about the scared, desperate woman who had stepped off that stage coach a decade ago. That woman could never have imagined this life, this happiness. She had come to the Wild West expecting nothing more than survival. Instead, she had found a man who saw her worth, a partnership that enriched them both, and a love that grew deeper with every passing year. As they prepared to return home to their children and their ranch, Clara realized that the greatest adventure of her life had not been the journey west or building a home in the wilderness. It had been learning to stand as an equal beside a man who valued her for who she was. That was the real gift Samuel had given her, more precious than land or security or even love. He had given her back herself. The train ride home from Denver was comfortable but slow, with frequent stops at tiny stations to take on water and fuel. Clara and Samuel sat close together, watching the familiar landscape roll past. They talked about the children, about the ranch, about plans for the future. Grace had shown such promise with the old piano Margaret had given them that Samuel suggested they might hire a music teacher. James was 13 now and increasingly interested in the cattle operation, already showing the same steady work ethic as his father. William, at 7, was the dreamer of the family, forever asking questions and reading every book he could get his hands on. "He might want more than ranch life," Clara said thoughtfully. "He asks me about cities, about universities, about all the places he has read about." "Then we will make sure he has the chance to pursue those dreams," Samuel said without hesitation. "Our parents could not give us much choice in what we became. We can do better for our children." It was such a Samuel thing to say, and Clara squeezed his hand gratefully. "You are a good father. I am trying to be," he said. "I did not have the best example, but I have you to guide me." When they finally reached Colorado City and hired a wagon to take them home, they found the ranch in perfect order. Margaret had stayed the entire week, and the children came running to greet them, all talking at once about everything that had happened in their absence. James had helped Tom Harris track down a missing calf. Grace had learned a new song and could not wait to play it. William had found a bird's nest and had been carefully observing it, recording his notes in a little journal Clara had given him. That night, after the children were finally settled and the house was quiet, Samuel and Clara stood on the porch looking out at the land they had built together. The full moon cast silver light over the pastures, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. "You ever regret it?" Samuel asked quietly. "Leaving Philadelphia, coming all the way out here to this hard country?" Clara considered the question seriously. She thought about what she had left behind, the city she had known all her life, the grave where her mother was buried, the few friends she had made. Then she thought about what she had found here, the home she and Samuel had built, the family they had created, the partnership that had given meaning to her life. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "This is where I belong, Samuel, with you, with our children, building this life. I would not change anything." He drew her close, and they stood there in the moonlight, two people who had found each other against all odds and created something beautiful from their unlikely beginning. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and the Nelson family with them. James grew into a young man as steady and reliable as his father. On his 18th birthday, Samuel made him a full partner in the ranch operation, much to James's pride and surprise. Grace's musical talent continued to develop, and when a traveling music teacher passed through Colorado City, Samuel arranged for weekly lessons. William, true to Clara's prediction, proved to be more scholar than rancher. When he turned 15, Samuel and Clara made the difficult decision to send him to boarding school in Denver, where he could receive the education his hungry mind craved. "He will come back," Clara said firmly, when Samuel looked sad watching William ride away toward the stagecoach. "Maybe not to ranch, but he will come back to visit to see family. We are letting him go to find his own path, not losing him." Samuel nodded, accepting the wisdom in her words. "You are right. It is just hard watching them grow up and leave." "That is our job as parents," Clara reminded him. "To raise them to be capable adults who can make their own way in the world. We want them to have choices, remember." Those choices shaped all their lives in unexpected ways. Grace, at 16, met a young lawyer who had recently opened a practice in Colorado City. Jonathan Wright was educated, kind, and utterly smitten with the beautiful, talented girl who played piano at community gatherings. Samuel and Clara watched the courtship carefully, and when Jonathan formally asked for permission to court Grace, Samuel invited him to the ranch for a serious conversation. Clara listened from the kitchen as Samuel spoke to the young man in the main room. "My daughter is precious to me," Samuel said bluntly. "But she is not property to be traded. If you want to marry her, you will ask her, not me. And if she says yes, you had better treat her as an equal partner in your life with respect and consideration. I will accept nothing less for my daughter." "I would not want it any other way, sir," Jonathan replied earnestly. "I have seen how you and Mrs. Nelson conduct your marriage. That is the example I hope to follow." Clara smiled to herself. Samuel was passing on the most important lesson of their lives to the next generation. Grace and Jonathan were married the following spring in a ceremony that drew families from all over the region. William came home from Denver for the wedding, full of stories about his studies and plans to attend university back east. James stood as his sister's groomsman, proud and a little sad to see his closest sibling leaving the ranch. After the ceremony, during the celebration at the ranch, Clara found a quiet moment alone with Grace. "Are you happy, sweetheart?" Grace's face glowed. "So happy, Mama. Jonathan is wonderful. He listens to me, respects my opinions. He wants me to continue with my music even after we are married. He says he cannot imagine silencing something that brings so much joy." "That sounds like a man who learned from good examples," Clara said, hugging her daughter close. "Your father set a high standard for how men should treat their wives. I am glad Jonathan is following it. You and Papa have the best marriage of anyone I know," Grace said seriously. "You are true partners. That is what I want with Jonathan." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Then you are going to have a wonderful life, my darling girl." With Grace settled and William away at school, James became even more central to the ranch operation. He was now 20, and Samuel relied on him heavily. Clara watched her eldest son with pride, seeing so much of Samuel in him, the same dedication, the same integrity. When James began courting Sarah Murphy, daughter of their neighbor Tom Murphy, Clara approved wholeheartedly. Sarah was a practical, hardworking girl who had been raised on a ranch and understood the life. More importantly, James looked at her the way Samuel looked at Clara, with respect and devotion. One evening that summer, James came to his parents with a proposal. "I have been thinking about the future," he said, nervously turning his hat in his hands. "Sarah and I want to marry, but I do not want to just stay here working for you forever, Papa. I want to build something of my own." "That is natural," Samuel said encouragingly. "What did you have in mind?" "The section of land to the north, beyond the creek," James said, the words coming faster now. "It has never been developed, but it has good water and grass. I know it is technically part of our ranch, but I was thinking, if you would be willing to sell it to me, I could build a house there, start my own herd. I have been saving my wages, and Sarah has a small inheritance from her grandmother. We could make a go of it, I think." Clara saw the flash of emotion cross Samuel's face, pride and sadness mixed together. Their son, ready to strike out on his own just as they had done so many years ago. "You do not need to buy it," Samuel said finally. "That land is your inheritance, James, yours and your siblings. I will deed you that section as a wedding present, and Clara and I will help you build your house. You have earned it, son." James's eyes widened. "Papa, I cannot just take it. That is too much." "You are not taking it," Samuel corrected. "We are giving it to you because we want to help you start your life the best way we can. The same way my father helped me and his father helped him. It is what parents do for their children when they can." James looked at Clara, who nodded her agreement. "Your father is right. We want to do this for you. You will still be close enough to help with our herd when needed, and we will be here if you need us. It is perfect." The wedding of James and Sarah took place in the fall, and then the whole community came together to raise a house on the northern section. In the tradition of barn raisings that had built so many structures across the frontier, neighbors arrived with tools and materials, and in 2 long days of hard work, a solid house took shape. Clara worked alongside Margaret and the other women, preparing enormous meals to feed the workers, and she felt a deep contentment watching the community they had become part of come together to help her son. William returned from his first year at university in Boston, full of ideas and enthusiasm. Over dinner, he regaled them with stories of his classes, his professors, the incredible library, the lectures he had attended. Samuel listened with a mixture of pride and bewilderment. This world his son was describing was so far from the life he knew that he could barely imagine it. "And what will you do with all this education?" Samuel asked, not unkindly. William's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. "I am not sure yet, Papa. I am studying law, but I am also interested in politics, in the way the territory is developing. There is talk of statehood eventually, and I would like to be part of shaping that future." "That is important work," Clara said firmly, seeing the worry in her youngest son's eyes. "We are proud of you, William. You are using the opportunities we gave you to make something of yourself. That is all we ever wanted." As the years continued to pass, Clara and Samuel found themselves entering a new phase of life. They were no longer the young couple struggling to build a ranch from nothing. They were established, respected members of the community, grandparents now that James and Sarah had blessed them with 2 grandsons. Samuel's hair had gone gray at the temples, and Clara had lines at the corners of her eyes from squinting into the sun. But they were still partners, still working together to maintain the ranch and support their children. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Samuel said thoughtfully, "Do you remember that first day you arrived? You looked so frightened, standing there with your carpet bag, like you might bolt at any moment." Clara laughed. "I was terrified. I thought I was coming to be a servant, to spend the rest of my life taking orders and being grateful for scraps." "I knew from the moment I saw you that I wanted more," Samuel admitted. "I tried to tell myself it was just loneliness, that I would treat you properly as an employee and nothing more. But Clara, there was something about you. Your strength, even in your fear. Your dignity, even though you thought you had come to a position of servitude. I wanted to know you, to have you in my life as more than a housekeeper." "You gave me everything I had lost," Clara said softly. "My sense of self-worth, my belief that I deserved respect and consideration. You asked me to stand beside you as an equal, and that changed everything. If you had just offered me security or even love, I might have been grateful. But you offered me partnership, and that made it possible for me to truly love you, not out of obligation or gratitude, but because I chose you as freely as you chose me." Samuel reached for her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. That was always the point, Clara. I did not want someone who felt obligated to me. I wanted a true partner, someone who stood with me by choice. These years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sun disappeared behind the mountains and the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, they could see the lights of James's house. Grace lived in Colorado City now, but she visited regularly with her husband and their 2 children. William was making a name for himself in Denver, working with the territorial legislature. All their children were thriving, pursuing their own dreams while still remaining connected to the family. "We did well," Clara said finally. "We built something good here, Samuel. Not just the ranch, but our family, our life together. We gave our children examples to follow and the freedom to make their own choices." "We did it together," Samuel corrected. "Every step of the way together." More time passed, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and family gatherings. Clara's hair went white, and Samuel developed a limp from old injuries that pained him more with each passing year. They gradually turned over more of the ranch operation to James, who had proved himself more than capable. Samuel and Clara spent more time simply being together, taking pleasure in the life they had built. When Colorado achieved statehood in 1876, the whole family gathered at the ranch to celebrate. William, who had been involved in the statehood movement, came home for a week, bringing his new wife, Helen, a schoolteacher he had met in Denver. Grace and Jonathan arrived with their 3 children. James and Sarah walked over from their house with their 4 sons. The house was full of noise and life, and Clara stood in the kitchen preparing yet another enormous meal, watching her family through the doorway and felt perfectly content. Samuel came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Happy?" he asked. "Completely," Clara said, leaning back against him. "Look at what we made, Samuel. Look at this beautiful family." "I look at you," he said simply. "Everything else came from that first moment when you stepped off that stagecoach and into my life." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Clara and Samuel took their customary walk around the property. It was something they had done for years, a time to be alone together, to talk about the day, to simply enjoy each other's company. They walked slowly now, Samuel leaning more heavily on his cane, but the tradition continued. "You ever think about what your life would have been if you had stayed in Philadelphia?" Samuel asked. Clara considered the question. "Sometimes. I probably would have ended up in a factory or as a domestic servant in some wealthy household. I might have married eventually if I was lucky, probably someone equally poor and desperate. I would have survived, but I would never have truly lived." "I think about what my life would have been without you," Samuel said quietly. "I would have managed the ranch, made it successful eventually, but I would have been alone, going through the motions without any real joy. My days would have had purpose but no meaning. You gave me meaning, Clara. You made my life worth living." They stopped near the cottonwood trees, now tall and spreading, their leaves rustling in the evening breeze. This spot had become their favorite, where they could see the whole ranch spread out before them, the results of decades of hard work and dedication. "We were lucky," Clara said. "So many people never find what we found. They settle for less, or they never even know that more is possible." "It was not just luck," Samuel argued. "We chose this, Clara. We chose to build a partnership based on respect and equality. We chose to value each other's opinions and contributions. We chose to face difficulties together rather than letting them drive us apart. Those were choices, and we made them every day for more than 30 years. Clara nodded slowly. "You are right. We chose each other, and we kept choosing each other. That was the real key." As they walked back to the house, Arms linked, Clara reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had arrived in Colorado territory as a desperate woman with no prospects, expecting to spend her life in service to others. Instead, she had found a man who saw her as an equal, who offered her partnership and respect along with love. Together, they had built a life that exceeded anything she could have imagined. The story of Clara and Samuel Nelson became part of the local lore, told as an example of what marriage could be when both partners approached it with respect and dedication. Young couples starting out would sometimes visit the ranch to ask their advice, and Clara's answer was always the same. Stand beside each other as equals. Value each other's contributions. Never let one person carry all the burden or make all the decisions. You are partners in everything. Into their 60s and then 70s, Samuel and Clara continued to live on the ranch, though they had fully turned over the operation to James. They spent their days in quiet contentment, tending Clara's extensive garden, reading together on the porch, playing with their growing number of grandchildren. Grace had 5 children eventually, William 3 and James 4. The ranch property expanded to accommodate another generation as their grandsons began to come of age and start their own families. One spring morning, Clara woke to find Samuel had not risen with his usual early habits. She touched his shoulder gently, and he opened his eyes, smiling at her. "I think I will stay in bed a bit longer this morning," he said, his voice weaker than usual. "These old bones are tired." Clara felt a flutter of worry but kept her voice calm. "Then I will bring you breakfast in bed. Just rest." She prepared his favorite meal, but when she returned, she found Samuel struggling to breathe. His face had gone gray and fear gripped Clara's heart. Samuel, talk to me." "Heart," he managed. "Clara, do not be frightened." "I am sending for the doctor," Clara said, but Samuel caught her hand. "No time. Please just stay with me." Clara climbed into bed beside him, cradling his head against her shoulder. "I am here, my love, I am right here." "Best years of my life," Samuel whispered. "Every day with you was a gift, Clara. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for standing beside me." "It was my honor," Clara said, tears streaming down her face. "You gave me everything, Samuel. A life worth living, a partnership worth having. I love you so much." "Love you," Samuel breathed. "Always." His breathing slowed, then stopped, and Clara held him as the sun rose fully over the ranch they had built together, bathing the room in golden light. Samuel Nelson was buried in the family cemetery on the property, in a spot he had chosen years before under a large cottonwood tree. The entire community turned out for the funeral, testimony to the respect he had earned over his lifetime. Clara stood straight and dry-eyed through the service, her children and grandchildren surrounding her. There would be time for tears later in private. Now, she wanted to honor the man who had given her such a full life with the strength he had always admired in her. After the funeral, James approached his mother carefully. "Mama, we want you to come live with us. You should not be alone in this big house." Clara shook her head. "Thank you, sweetheart, but this is my home. Your father and I built it together, and I am not ready to leave it. I will be fine here." "At least let Sarah come stay with you for a while," James insisted. Clara agreed to that compromise, and for the next few months, her daughter-in-law was a frequent presence. But gradually, Clara reclaimed her solitude, needing the quiet to process her grief and adjust to life without the partner who had been at her side for 44 years. She found comfort in the routines they had established together. She still took evening walks around the property, though now she walked alone. She still sat on the porch in the evenings, sometimes reading, sometimes just watching the sunset. She tended her garden with the same care she always had, finding peace in the rhythm of planting and harvesting. Her children worried, but Clara assured them she was managing. And in truth, though she missed Samuel with an ache that never quite faded, she was not drowning in grief. They had had a full life together, had loved deeply and built something lasting. She had no regrets, no words left unsaid, no love unexpressed. That was a rare gift, and Clara recognized it. One afternoon, about a year after Samuel's death, Clara was working in the garden when her granddaughter, Grace's youngest daughter, came to visit. Emily was 18, bright and curious, and she often came to talk with Clara about life and love and the future. "Grandmother," Emily said, sitting beside Clara on the garden bench, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course, dear. You and grandfather had such a wonderful marriage. Everyone always talks about it, how you were true partners. I want that someday, but I am not sure I will find it. Most of the men I know do not seem to think of women as equals." Clara set down her gardening tools and looked at her granddaughter seriously. "Finding a true partnership is not easy," she admitted, "but it is possible. The key is knowing your own worth first. When your grandfather asked me to marry him, he offered me equality. But I could only accept that offer because I believed I deserved it. If you know your own value, you will not settle for less than you deserve." "But how do you know if someone really means it?" Emily asked. "How do you know they are not just saying what you want to hear? You watch their actions," Clara said firmly. "Your grandfather told me I would be his equal, but more importantly, he treated me that way from the very beginning. He asked my opinion. He listened to my ideas. He made decisions with me, not for me. Words are easy, Emily. Actions tell you the truth." Emily nodded slowly, absorbing this wisdom. "I understand. Thank you, grandmother." After her granddaughter left, Clara returned to her garden, thinking about that conversation. She had been so young when she arrived in Colorado territory, so uncertain of herself and her place in the world. Samuel had given her the space to find her strength, had believed in her even when she did not believe in herself. That was the real gift of their partnership, not just the equality itself, but the way it had allowed both of them to become the best versions of themselves. Clara lived for 5 more years after Samuel's death, years filled with family and purpose. She watched her grandchildren grow and begin families of their own. She saw William elected to the state legislature, making the kind of difference he had dreamed of as a young man. She celebrated Grace's silver wedding anniversary and attended the dedication of a school named after Jonathan, who had become a prominent figure in Colorado City. She stood beside James as they expanded the ranch to include land his sons were developing. When Clara finally passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 77, she was buried beside Samuel under the cottonwood trees. At her funeral, her children spoke of her strength, her wisdom, and the example she had set of what a true partnership could be. But it was Emily who perhaps understood best what her grandmother's life had meant. "My grandmother came west expecting to be a servant," Emily said to the gathered crowd. "But my grandfather saw her worth and offered her something revolutionary for those times: true equality. Together, they built not just a successful ranch, but a partnership that became a model for all of us. They showed us that marriage could be about more than duty or survival. It could be about respect, shared purpose, and deep, abiding love. That is the legacy they left us, and it is one we should all strive to honor." The Nelson Ranch continued to thrive through the generations, but more than land or cattle, what Samuel and Clara Nelson left behind was a different kind of legacy. They had shown that even in the hardest circumstances, even in a time and place where women were often treated as property, it was possible to build a relationship based on equality and mutual respect. They had proved that true partnership made both people stronger, that lifting each other up created something greater than either could achieve alone. The story of the woman who arrived expecting to serve, and the cowboy who asked her to stand beside him as his equal became part of the fabric of Colorado history, told and retold as an example of what was possible when two people chose to see each other's worth and build a life together based on that recognition. Their descendants carried forward the values they had established, each generation teaching the next about respect, partnership, and the transformative power of love freely given between equals. In the end, Clara and Samuel's greatest achievement was not the ranch they built, or the fortune they accumulated, or even the family they raised. It was the way they loved each other, completely and equally, creating a partnership that honored them both and showed everyone around them a better way of living. They had taken the harsh realities of frontier life and created within it a space of mutual respect and deep affection, proving that even in the wildest places, love and equality could not just survive but flourish. Their story began with a desperate woman stepping off a stagecoach and a lonely cowboy looking for help. It ended with a legacy of partnership and love that touched generations. And perhaps that is the most romantic story of all, that two people, finding each other across the vast emptiness of the frontier, chose to build something beautiful together. Brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day, until they had created not just a home but a haven, not just a marriage but a true meeting of equals that would inspire all who came after them to reach for the same height of partnership and devotion.